Now, for more on the economic relations between China and the US, let's bring in Marc Ross, founder of communications, content and commerce strategy firm Caracal Global. He was also a communications director for the US-China Business Council. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we know that the economic relationship is usually the one that tends to steal all the headlines. But what role do events like the China-US social and cultural dialogue play in relations between the two countries?
Well, I think as we just heard, especially, I'm actually an adjunct professor at George Washington University, so it was very great to see the program there. But obviously, more and more students getting educated in both the US and China is wildly important. Sports play a vital role, entertainment and culture. This is a great gateway to open up more and more dialogue between our two countries.
Now, we certainly saw that when it comes to things like education and innovation from the report that was just released. Just how important is that when it comes to branching that into other areas of cooperation?
I think if you look at the big thing, I think what's interesting is that America generally is very interested. We want to meet more people around the world. China is a rising power and is very interested in learning some of the greatest new techniques and technologies, which many US companies have. So it's a great opportunity for the two nations to connect. And I think looking long term, which I think is very important with this relationship, 10, 15, 20 years, it can only be positive to have more and more engagement.
So how would you characterize the current relationship between China and the US?
I always say to people, the China relationship, the US-China relationship is probably what you want it to be, right? I mean, there are certainly some people that have challenges and there are limitations. There are other people that are very happy with it. I think it really depends on the sector, your space, where you're working, are you exporting and importing? But I think on balance, it's positive. I mean, we have these tremendous amount of connections. You're seeing Rex Tillerson will be flying over to Beijing, as you said tonight. And President Trump will be meeting with President Xi later on this fall. So on balance, overall, I think it's moving in the right direction.
Now let's look at some of those sectors. Which ones do you think show the most opportunity for promise and progression?
I think in the short term, when we advise our clients, we talk a lot about consumer good products, the Coca-Colas of the world, the Starbucks of the world, entertainment. I think what the NBA is doing is fantastic. So in those areas, a lot of tremendous opportunities. And I think if you're focused in that space, a lot of good space to grow and expand your business.
Now, what about some of the issues that may be perhaps sticking points?
Well, I think there's the biggest issue, I think at the end of the day, is the ability to sell into the market, right? If you are restricted by government to even sell your goods or services, that's a huge challenge. So market access issues will continue to be a problem, whether they be in the financial services industry or just generally in technology industry. Those will be sticking points for sure. So how those get sorted out and will each side show patience, those will be kind of critical.
Now, there does seem to be a disconnect between what happens in Washington versus some of the action that we're seeing from individual states who want to see closer ties with China. How do you think all this is affecting relationships both for Chinese businesses and US businesses? Yeah,
I think the further you get away from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, America is very interesting. So, I think what's happening, I grew up in the Midwest, and I think you see Governor Rick Schneider, what he's done in Michigan, he's made several trips to China. Totally different story. There's a lot of engagement at the state and local level for investment. I think as more and more Chinese companies and government delegations, I try to encourage them to spend as little time as possible in New York and DC and see other parts of the country like St. Louis, Detroit, Minneapolis, and really start those engagements. So once again, I think the relationship, it depends where you're sitting, is kind of where the tension points are.
Now, we know that each country has their own set of economic goals. We would know that Trump wants to put America first, more jobs for US workers, and we know that China also wants to boost its domestic consumption. How do their two economic goals really align with each other?
Yes, the Chinese dream of President Xi and America first with President Trump, very interesting. Well, I think, you both have rising competitor powers, and I think at the end of the day, these aren't bad things. I think where we can find common ground is really kind of critical. It's I think what is said to domestic audiences doesn't always connect with what's happening on global stages. So it's not surprising that local leaders want to put their countries first. But I think on balance, if you look at the big picture, there's a lot more engagement that is happening at the international level between the US and China.
And so, as you said, this is something to really look at long term. How do you see this relationship developing?
Well, I think if you're in this space, you have to be generally optimistic and forward-looking. So I think it's, there's definitely going to be, it's not surprising that the two biggest economies in the world are going to have friction points. It's not surprising that there's competition. It's not surprising that the US and China see the world differently in terms of geopolitics. So, I think taking a step back, looking at the big picture, and expecting that there is going to be friction, taking a little bit of heat out of the conversation is really kind of key for everybody. And I think looking long term, it's not surprising that China wants to have a more active say in the world, and the US, needs to work within those bounds, especially